Moving on to agenda item F, the executive portion, page 13 of your packet. Registrar's report. Dave?
Yes, thank you, Chair Richardson. I'd like to start with just a brief overview of the Sunset Review hearing and the subsequent questions that we've had to answer, and they're on page 17 of your report. As Director Garfield mentioned, we appeared in front of the Legislature on February 26. Those in attendance included Chair Richardson, past Chair Kevin Albanese, Tanya Corcoran, and me. It went very well. They brought up a few issues that we'll talk about in just a moment. But what I need to do this morning is just very briefly cover the outstanding issues and the proposed answers so that you as board members can either approve them or not approve them. But if you do approve them, we would ask that you would delegate or designate staff to perform any final follow-up to them, any edits. If you have any suggestions, we can include, we will do so. On page 18, we cover staffing. There was a concern that we've had to redirect a lot of staff to disasters. We've got an increase in consumer complaints. Our license applications are up. So all of that is additional workload. The good news is by cross-training and our staff being very motivated, they've stepped up or able to manage the workload at this time. At such time as we can, we would pursue a budget change proposal for additional staff. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is board member vacancies. As the director mentioned, they're very proactive in working with us and filling vacancies. We have Karen Nelson with us today. We do currently have 2 vacancies. We have a public member and a specialty member. But the good news is we have a quorum. So that's the answer to item number 2.
Mr. Folt, for those in the audience,
Yes.
could you explain what the Sunset Review is as we go through this? Because I think it's an important relationship we have with the legislature.
Yes, thank you so much. As a DCA board, you're subject to a review of your operation every 1 to 4 years. We were fortunate that we were extended 4 years 4 years ago. And what that means is that you have to have legislation that would extend you for additional time. If we don't receive an extension, January 1st of 2020, the board would no longer exist. It would become a bureau. And there's, of course, that's kind of a civic question as to the difference between the two. But I think we have a lot of people here with us today, and you can see the benefit to being a board, and that it provides the opportunity to have, a public forum and to answer any questions and to try to be receptive to, I would say, community concerns. But what happens through the process is they look at your operation. It's an opportunity to find weaknesses, areas that you can improve in, but also if you have a need for additional resources, you can ask for resources. What will ultimately happen is there'll be a bill, and there's already been one introduced by Senator Stephen Glazer that will hopefully extend the board, but it can also include other legislative ideas. And so some of what I'm going to talk about today would be some of those ideas that we could work with the legislature on and completing for the benefit of the public. Okay.
Dave, are you taking comments on these issues as you go, or do you want to wait till you're through them all?
I would be happy to, at the board's pleasure, however you prefer.
Okay, I have a comment on number 2 that you just, do vacancies affect the CSLB ability to meet and undertake its important work? And I don't know if there's a way that we can amend our response, but our board is made up of 15 members. 8 of those are public members. 4 of those 8 are filled by people in the trades, and 1 is a senior member, 1 is a building official, and I may have left 1 out. And then 5 of the 15 are contractor members. So 2 of these positions that are still vacant, 1 is a senior member and 1 is a contractor member that hasn't been filled for some time, over a year. With regard to the senior member vacancy, our mission on this board is to protect the consumer, the most vulnerable entities within the state of California are the elderly. So missing a senior member, I think, or filling the vacancy of the senior member, I think is critical. Also, with regard to the other vacancy, which is a contractor member, several of us that are contractor members are terming out this year. And I think to achieve parity on this board, it's important to also fill the contractor member slot as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to issue number 3, recent legislation. Another real advantage to being a board, excuse me, is you can sponsor your own legislation, something that the board's been very effective in achieving. There's been, in the last year, 35% of the bills that affected the construction industry were sponsored by the board. The Sunset Review Committee did have a concern, how are we getting that information out? And you'll see on page 21 that through our Public Affairs Office, we have a lot of different methods for distributing this information through our website, through social media, the Law and Reference Book, and our Contractors newsletter. I want to thank Rick Lobes for completing it. It's on my desk for final review. You'll be seeing that shortly. So that's the answer to number 3. If there's any questions regarding how we can get information out to the industry and to the public, I think we're successful in doing that. Issue number 4, fund condition. A little bit of a concern that our reserves are approximately 2 months. The good news is applications are up. We were able to raise fees a couple of years ago. We're starting to see the results of that. We anticipate receiving additional $5 million in revenue next year. That should meet our needs. If we do have a fund imbalance and we need to raise fees, we have the ability to do it through the regulatory rulemaking process. But at this time, we're not suggesting we need to raise fees. So that's the answer to number 4. If there's any questions regarding that. Issue number 5 is pro rata, what we pay to the Department of Consumer Affairs for the services they provide. The Contractors Board has a cap of 10%. That cap works well for us. We'd like to see that continued. We are satisfied with the services that the Department of Consumer Affairs provides. Issue number 6 addresses examination rates. Our examination rates do vary, and there are some that we have a lower pass rate. And you would see in the board packet that some of the pass rates are 37% for the C2 installation contractor, 39% for others. And what we do is we look at those. We can address that through occupational analysis. Also, we do provide applicants information on what in general is on the exam, what steps they can take to prepare. But overall, we're comfortable with our examination process. If there's opportunities to improve it, we will do so. Issue number 7, licensing and certifications. Of course, we license contractors, but the board does not certify contractors. There are certifications, though, that we work with our partnering state agencies on enforcing, and one would be electrician certification, also asbestos removal, and fire protection suppression systems. We have memorandum of understanding with these partnering state agencies, so if industry comes to us with concerns, we can absolutely meet with our partners. We can work with them on their certification program to improve the certification process if necessary. Under enforcement issues, our Public Affairs Office does such a great job of publicizing our stings and our proactive enforcement. Sometimes it gives a perception that we're focusing more of our enforcement reports on proactive enforcement than consumer complaints. And that's not the case. 70% of our enforcement staff are focused on working the consumer filed complaints, 30% on proactive. But one thing that we did include in the report is that we have enforcement committee meetings, and at those meetings, we do prioritize enforcement resources. It's up to Enforcement Chair Kevin Albanese whether he'll have one in the latter part of April, first part of May. But in the event he chooses to do so, we would include on that agenda enforcement prioritization to make sure that we're using our enforcement resources as appropriate, as effective and appropriately as possible. So moving on to number 9, workforce development and disaster response is a concern that in the disaster areas there may not be enough contractors available or workers to meet the needs. We put together different strategies for addressing that problem. In October of 2017, we began partnering with what they call the Wildfire Recovery Long-Term Housing Task Force, to try to identify workers that can come in and meet the need. We've worked with other states, with the National Association of State Contractors Licensing Agencies, to encourage contractors that are qualified to come in, become licensed in California, and to perform work as necessary. We've also, for 30 years, been part of a grant program where it's the Construction Management and Education Sponsorship Act that allows licensees to pay into a fund when they renew their license. And since 2002, more than 1.3 million in grants have been distributed to 7 different universities. So, we're proud of what we've done. One thing that we didn't mention, we talked about the CalBO partnering, is workshops that we envision putting on throughout the state. Right now, we're putting workshops on in Sacramento and Norwalk. We're looking at doing this throughout the state with building officials, with Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, and anybody else who wants to partner with us on encouraging people to consider a career in the construction industry. And if they're already out there working unlicensed, to do it right, to get the license, get the workers' comp, and start withholding payroll taxes. So that's our answer to number 9. Workers' compensation insurance. It's a problem where some industries, we've done research into the industries that have widespread cheating, lack of a better word. They're filing a false exemption to workers' comp, yet they have workers. The work they're performing requires, help. They can't do. You generally can't do it by yourself, so you're going to have to hire someone to work with you. Examples of this would be concrete tree trimming, being two that we really want to take a real hard look at and see if we should, in fact, require workers' comp for those trades. What was the third one? Fire suppression, yes. Fire suppression, because you have to be certified to do it, so we know they have workers, and how can they have an exemption on file? This again, right at this point, we're looking to send this to the Enforcement Committee meeting to make sure to discuss having stakeholder meetings to clearly identify those trades. Or if they prefer, we can go to the Legislative Committee and start drafting the legislation to require workers' comp for additional trades, very similar to what the roofing contractors have. Issue number 11, that's tree worker safety. We've been working with Division of Occupational and Safety and Health regarding contractors that are hiring people to do tree work, and the concern is they're hiring workers that don't have the equipment or have the training to do it safely. And what we've included in our response is that in 2018, DOSH issued 45 administrative actions against contractors that didn't provide that necessary safety and equipment. Had there been a requirement, they refer that to the CSLB, we could have imposed some type of discipline on that license. Probably would have been a citation. Depending on how egregious it was, it might have been an accusation. But we're going to need legislation to enable the board to take action for these violations without having a death or serious injury. So this would be something the Legislative Committee needs to vet at their meeting, and I believe that's going to be on or about May the 2nd, any event, probably the week of April the 29th. Issue number 12, technology issues. The department went to a system they call Breeze. We have our prior registrar, Cindy Christensen, here, was very instrumental in seeing that the Contractors Board was in the third part of the rollout of Breeze. And by the time they got to the CSLB's schedule for implementation, it was discovered it wouldn't work well for the Contractors Board. Now, unfortunately, we had paid over $4 million at that point. But we paid that money, as did all other DCA boards and bureaus, towards the Breeze program. We're not seeking to get any money back. It's money that was spent. What we're doing today, though, is we're enhancing the system we have. We're very unique at the Contractors Board in that we have 3 different systems. We have in Iowa scanning system where we scan our documents. We have our enforcement and licensing system for tracking our records. And we have our own testing. We call that the SCORE system. So CSLB is very unique. We have a system that's working well for us. We just would like to improve upon it. Okay, so moving on to issue number 13. One thing we've discovered in our licensing division is that for those contractors that have limited liability companies, they're required to have a general liability insurance policy. And what happens in the insurance industry is they don't renew it till the day it expires or close to it, and so that can result in a lapse in licensure. And that's certainly something unfair, and we don't want that to occur. We need to give some time for the insurance industry to provide us that information. We're suggesting there be a 45-day window for a contractor to notify or provide to the board the limited liability, general liability insurance policy for a limited liability company. And another issue that we'd like to fix is with the Secretary of State reporting. That can take time to get that all reconciled. Currently, it's a 30-day time frame to get your records to match with the CSLB and the Secretary of State. We'd like to add an additional 30 days. Reason it's 45 days for the insurance, because that matches what we do with our workers' comp policies. The 30 days is more in line with how we generally look at the ability for a contractor to provide us records, license maintenance records. So that would give 60 days to reconcile Secretary of State records. Again, I don't think it's very controversial. It's something the Legislative Committee needs to vet at their next committee meeting. Issue number 15, unsatisfied judgments. The law isn't clear enough as to how somebody can be held accountable for a construction-related judgment. And what has happened is many consumers they've contracted with somebody, they know them by their name, but they don't realize that when they file that small claims case, they need to name the licensed entity. If they only name the person as an individual, we are not able to suspend the license or to deny a license. So it's really just, it's almost cleanup, but we need to be clear. If you as an individual have a construction-related judgment entered against you, you're not entitled to be a licensed contractor, to be on an active contractor's license. So that's another ledge proposal that we would ask the Legislative Committee to address. Issue number 16 is regarding electrician certification. The law provides for the board to require an additional $20 upon the renewal, or when a C10 license renews their license, an additional $20. The problem is it says shall, and we're just suggesting that as we move forward with these ledge proposals, that we would say, the law says may, the board may ask for it. We'd like for the board to say shall, so that it's mandatory, so that we can start collecting that money. And what it will do is it'll fund 2 investigators, 1 north, 1 south, and the legal action costs to enforce the certification law. So that's issue number 15. Issue number 17 is regarding the continuation of the board, and you'll see on page 40 that, as we noted in the original report, a well-regulated construction industry protects the health, safety, and welfare of consumers, and we are recommending that the board continue. Now, at the hearing, there were 3 other issues that came up. The first was reciprocity with other states, and specifically reciprocity in relationship to disasters. Now, I already covered that with item number 9, so I'm going to move on to the next one. And that would be, how do we know if we're effective in disaster areas? It's a very good point. It's something that our staff are going to look at, ways that we can measure our success. We know that in a disaster area, we place more than these recent wildfire disasters. We place more than 400 signs. We have a very active presence. We're educating consumers. We're working with the Department of Insurance, local law enforcement, to make sure that transient criminals and other unscrupulous people, unlicensed, aren't in the area. And the way we've measured it to date is based on the consumer complaints that we're not receiving. We know that we don't have that proactive enforcement like we did in the early 90s with the Northridge earthquake. We could be overrun with complaints. It's not happening today. So we believe our education, our public affairs office, our enforcement division are being effective in helping consumers in disaster areas. And the last thing they brought up was the contractor's bond. Contractor's bond's currently $15,000. Contractor goes under, may leave a lot of consumers harmed. That $15,000 doesn't go very far. So what we're suggesting is that we're going to work with the surety companies that issue these bonds, find out what the claims are, to what extent are a number of people filing complaints or filing claims on these bonds. What would be a more reasonable amount if there is one? This would be something, though, that would likely go through the Legislative Committee and to the Board for consideration, keeping in mind that when we've tried to do this in the past, the underwriting costs have been a deterrent. So you have to look at all that because you want to be mindful that you're not imposing another barrier to licensure, but at the same time, we want to do all we can to protect consumers. So that concludes the report. If there are any questions or if you have any ways we can improve upon it, we sure like to hear from you.
Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we accept the answers and put it to the staff to work to finalize them and formalize them for resubmission as soon as possible.
I'll second that.
Christie?
So, in compliance with the Open Meeting Act, if you delegate any final decision to a multi-member body, so that's human beings, and since staff count as human beings, if you want this matter to not require another meeting to approve the final edits by the multi-member body, then I would recommend delegating final review and approval of the answers to a single individual. Because only if you delegate it to a single individual does it avoid the requirement for having another meeting. Even with two. Advisory committees are okay because they come back and report out to the public, and those are multi-member bodies. But if you're making a final decision on anything, it needs to be an individual person that gets delegated the authority to approve. So it's your decision, but if you delegate to a multi-member body of human beings, there has to be another board meeting.
Would someone like to make a motion for me to appoint a single member?
I think so, because I don't think we're going
Madam
to
Chair, you have a motion and a second on the floor, so she either has to amend her motion or withdraw her motion before you call for another motion, with respect.
I'm asking for an amendment if you would like to.
I can amend to include that the chair appoint one person to be the final arbiter of what goes forward in compliance with what we've heard here today.
And I'll accept that amendment with a second.
Thank you. I would like to appoint Susan Granzella to do the final.
Or is it appropriate for the registrar to step into that role?
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, the registrar can ask for all the help from anybody he wants to before he feels he's good with the final product, but it would go forward from whoever you appoint. But
Correct. So do I need a motion on that fully? Okay.
You have a first and a second, then you'll need to take public comment, vote, and then you can appoint.
Okay. Is there any public comment at this time? All right.
Through the chair, just real quick, two things. On the $15,000 bond, and I know that we'll talk about it when it's more appropriate, we have that information. The barrier to licensure issue, I think, is really huge, and the consumers do have the opportunity to get a payment performance bond. That's supposed to be in all the home improvement contracts, that they know that they have that right to get that extra assurance. So I'm really concerned about adding barriers. The other thing, the director said some really kind words about the sunset review. That would not have happened without Tanya and her staff and Dave really preparing us. I mean, we had amazing binders. Every issue, every thought was addressed and laid out. So thank you very much for the preparation and all the work behind the scenes to make that happen.
I agree. Thank you.
can I make one more comment about that too? Also,
Yes.
David and I spent a lot of time talking to the head people for the bonding association, the Surety Brokers Association, and a couple of pretty major bonding company sureties. And what Kevin said is exactly right. Lifting that thing beyond 15, it's not the underwriting cost as much as the underwriting requirements that are going to really stop, put a screeching halt on anybody who's trying to get into the business.
Felice, can we call for a vote on the current motion, please? There was no public comment.
Marlo Richardson,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese. Aye. Frank Altamura,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Linda Clifford. Aye. David De La Torre,
Aye.
David Diaz,
Yep.
Susan Granzilla. Aye. Joan Hancock.
Aye.
Mike Layden. Aye. Frank Shetter,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson, Nancy Springer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to the energy storage systems. I just would like to advise you in advance, we're limiting public comment to 3 minutes. I'm going to ask that you please hold to those 3 minutes. We will be monitoring the time, and I don't want to have to cut anyone off or have anyone removed unnecessarily for lack of compliance. Thank you.
Madam Chair, because the importance of this next item to the electrical industry and the fact that I'm a licensed C10 electrical contractor, I'm going to recuse myself from this particular issue. Thank you.
Through the
Thank you,
chair.
Frank.
Marlo?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to just get this thing going and all that. I want to thank Dave and the staff for putting this whole packet together. I've learned more probably in a short period of time about PV and energy storage systems than I probably ever wanted to know. It dates me. I think Joan's the only one been on the board longer than me now. And it predates me on the board for all this stuff and everything else. Packet it's amazing. It was put together very, very well. So the decision we make today is very important, and we can see by, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred people out there. This is an important decision today. So, and probably one of the most important decisions I've made since I've been on the board. So I want to just get this going. I want to move to approve the staff's recommendation and direct staff to consider battery storage system size, complexity, voltage, and potential risk. Draft a proposed regulatory package for board consideration that would prohibit or restrict certain contractor classifications from performing the installation of battery storage systems, and assign appropriate board committee or committees and provide updates at each board meeting.
Second.
Thank you.
Is there any, first of all, excuse me, Rick, do we have any order? I mean, speaker cards or some sort
Well,
of order?
I was just wondering if it would please the board if I could just briefly go through the report, and I'll try to make it very quick. Is that okay? Okay.
Did you? And then can we have him repeat what he said, because I didn't quite catch all of that? The third step, okay.
Yeah, it's the third recommendation with a couple little things added on.
I don't know if you all have a report. I know we brought quite a few here. And just so I don't want to forget, there's a lot of material that went into developing this report. We had hearings I'll talk about in a second. There's transcripts. All of that information is available on our website. And I just wanted to kind of give you a little background. And if you look at page 3 at the bottom, what we've included is a prior regulation that the board considered and implemented, and it was December 30th, 2009, where the board changed the regulation as to the solar class. But what was interesting, you'll see at the bottom of the page, that prior to that point, The solar classification did include collectors and storage systems. But what the board did in December 2009, again through the regulatory rulemaking process, is they changed the regulation to be just more general. And our research indicates they did that because they recognized that it was an evolving technology. The way it reads today, it says a solar contractor installs, modifies, maintains, and repairs thermal and photovoltaic solar energy systems. A licensee classified in this section shall not undertake or perform building or construction trades, crafts, or skills except when required to install a thermal or photovoltaic solar system. So, I'd like to move on to page 6. And this will explain to all of you there, all of you with us today, why this report was developed. And it was developed because the board directed staff to conduct public meetings to determine if the A, general engineering, or B, general building, C4, boiler, hot water, heating and steam fitting, C10, electrical, C20, warm heating and air conditioning, C36, plumbing, C46, solar, and C53, swimming pool classifications should be precluded from installing an energy storage system in a standalone contract or when included in the installation of a solar system. So that was the board's direction, and this report really is the result of that direction. This report has been developed to be factual, to simply include the information that we obtain. Now, you all know that towards the end of it, we do have options for the board's consideration. I'll get to those in just a second. Now, if you look on page 25 through 33, we had 71 speakers that came to our public protection or public information hearings. The majority of those speakers spoke in favor of the C10 being the one that would be performing this work. There were others that spoke in favor of the solar contractors continuing to do it in conjunction with the solar contract. And then we had a handful that thought it should be studied more. I just wanted to throw that out. Again, that's all summarized in the report. On page 23 and 24, that summarizes industry expert meetings. We have what I would consider leaders of these two industries. We have Bernadette Docaro for the solar industry. We have Eddie Bernanke for the electrical industry. And they were able to identify experts that came in and talked to staff as to at least their position on this type of work. And the C10 contractors explained how it's evolving. It's becoming arguably more complex. It poses a danger. And the training that certified electricians have is beneficial to the public in making sure they're installed appropriately. The C46 experts said that a lot of them are more plug and play. They have trip wires or some ability so that they really don't pose a safety issue. And the solar contractors also have training. While it's not mandated, there is training available and that they're successful in installing these. On page 38, we included some injuries or some, I would say damage, I think some of the building departments. There wasn't a whole lot. One of the things we were looking at is whether or not there were any clear examples of harm to persons or property. And the report, it doesn't reflect any significant examples of that other than there's a potential for this to occur. The report does include information from the Division of Occupational Safety and Health. If you go to the website, you could download information they provided us. And looking at that information, we were not able to extrapolate anything out of it directly related to the installation of a battery system. We received considerable written correspondence, 269 letters, pretty much evenly divided. We have letters that support the C46 continuing to do the work with the PV system, and then we have about 50% saying it should be the C10's work. We did receive 28 letters from legislators that were arguing that the work should be done by C10 contractors. Again, that information is all available on the website. So, I'm sure the board members have all read this report. A lot of effort went into it. It was a group effort. I do want to say that one of our staff it was rumored that he was working till 2 in the morning on this report, and that's Mr. Michael Jemnensky here. So I really want to thank Mike for going the extra mile, just trying to make it as accurate as possible. Before I get to the options though, Mike, is there anything you'd like to add on the report? He's going to retire, yeah.
Just that it's a significant issue, and I'm glad that the board is taking time to look at it, and I think we're all appreciative of the people who took time to show up here today and express their views. So it was with that in mind that we put it in the effort that we put into this report. It was important enough to really lay out the issues and the facts. It's important to you, so it's important to us.
Okay, so with that, if we turn to the options and staff recommendation on section 7. Page 74. And it's a little summary here, because the one thing that really comes out of this study is that there are public officials, there are C10 contractors and others that believe the electrician certification program is beneficial to doing this work. Now, I just want to make sure everybody's aware, I think most of you probably are, that the only classification that's required to use certified electricians is the C10 classification. So with that, having read the report, the first option would be to take no action if you don't believe as a board member that there's a problem. You have the authority. We've developed this report. If you don't see a problem or a potential problem in the future that needs to be addressed, then no action has to be taken. Now, if you believe that an action or something needs to be done to protect the public, that these systems, as they expand, could pose a threat. And one thing I would mention is that I think you're probably all aware that Governor Newsom has a plan to build 3.5 million residential units before 2025, and these units are going to have some type of a solar system, or we've learned in this report, some type of a power wall or battery system. Many will have it built right into the wall. So it's going to be a continuing large issue. I mean, some of these homes will have the panels on the roof. Others will be more of a kind of like, I'm trying to the right term, but a solar farm where it would be more of a community solar generating facility, but yet you would have a battery system in your house. So it is a big deal. First option, take no action. Second option is to look at the electrician certification requirement. It's always seemed odd to us as staff that if you're working for a general building contractor, you're working for an engineering contractor, and you're performing electrical, you don't have to be a certified electrician. However, if you're doing that same work for a C10, you must be certified. And as we looked at this study, it tended to focus on the C46 and C10, but one thing that was very evident, Nancy and I met with a lot of building officials, and at least, I'll say with the county building officials especially, their main concern was with the general building contractors that are doing this work. So it's not just a C46 and C10 issue, it's also the general building contractors. Option number 2 is to work with industry to pursue legislation to amend the labor code. The labor code is what defines who has to be certified. It's Labor Code 108 and 108.2. Now, the reason why this isn't a staff recommendation is because we haven't received a lot of industry support to amend that labor code, and also the Contractors Board enforces the 7000 series of the Business and Professions Code. We're not the direct enforcers of the labor code. The labor code falls under a different department. It's the Department of Industrial Relations. Specifically for this issue, it's Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. And so we didn't go with that recommendation, but it's a possibility, especially if the two industry groups wanted to get together and let the legislature decide if there needs to be a change and what that change should be. Don't have control over that, so we go to option number 3. Option number 3 is staff recommendation. And we were careful in how we drafted this. I just want to say that David Diaz, he did read the recommendation, And when we say prohibit or restrict, we use the word restrict by perhaps limiting what some installation, who could do certain types of installations. An example being maybe an industrial installation would be treated differently than, say, residential. Idea here, though, is that we be very mindful of what the governor is trying to accomplish with these homes. Don't want to undermine that in any way. Ideally, if you go with option number 3, we would need to have another meeting with industry. It would have to be a collaborative approach. Ideally, we would come together with some type of an agreement on how we can bridge these, I would say, these differences of opinion between the C46 and the C10 industry, but also looping in the B general building contractors. Right now, they're kind of sitting on the sidelines, but they are still impacted. The regulatory hearing process, it's a slow process. It could take up to 2 years. Next step would be to come together and try to draft some proposed regulatory language. We would then submit that to our board here. If they approve it, then it would move on to the department. It goes to agency. There's another government agency that would look at it. It's a very transparent process, and it's the process the board has used over the years to make changes to its regulatory, to its classification structure. I would like to ask our counsel, Christy Shields, if you have anything to add about the regulatory hearing process.
Well, with regulations, you have to do a lot of intake to establish the record to determine why the change is necessary. One of the requirements for any regulatory change is to prove by substantial evidence in the record the necessity for the change. And because our public policy is public protection, you would need to make sure that those hearings address that issue so that you have what you would need to prove necessity for the change of any classification. In addition, you would need to do an assessment of the fiscal and business economic impact to industry. That would need to be part of the discussion, because one of the things that you have to address when you're making a regulatory change is any adverse economic impact to industry, and whether there are any least or other less restrictive or impactful alternatives to the amendments that you're proposing. So these are all things that need to be considered. One other thing I think you should consider is, and I don't know where this will go, and that will probably be part of the discussion at these regulatory hearings and meetings, is what solution you're looking for and whether you want it to apply globally, because as mentioned, the general A and B classifications, those are in statute. So you may have very limited ability to actually address a global change across all classifications without a statutory amendment. So just keep that in mind, but having these hearings will maybe kind of tease out what you think the solutions should be, and right now we don't really have a clear answer about that. These are just going to be discussions about where things might go. One thing I would ask for clarification on is the additional committees, whether they would be standing committees or they would be advisory committees, because if they're a 2-person advisory committee, we wouldn't have to have a meeting, but if they're a standing committee, we would need to notice those and have more formal hearings. So just on the motion, if you could clarify that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one other thing. We do have 2 videos. We have one from the C46 industry and one from the C10 industry. They're both about 10 minutes long. What would be the board's pleasure? Would you like to show those for the folks in attendance before we get public comment?
Are these the videos that were on our?
They are. They are available on the website along with 3 additional videos.
Let's do board
I thought
comment.
they were really good videos, but I'm not sure that they were as informative as I would want, and just tagging on that, in a regulatory hearing situation, what do you foresee, what would that look like? Would there be opportunity for demonstrations? Do they take place at our headquarters? Is it, or is some of those meetings outsourced in the field? How does that work?
Well, if you're going to undertake any kind of complex regulatory process, usually those hearings are held separate from a board meeting, but they can be a part of a board meeting, so it would be up to your chair on how that would work, or you could put it in your motion. It's up to you. But yes, there always would be opportunity for public comment. But the comments would be limited based on the size of the public that would attend. So I don't know that there would always be time to show a complete video at those hearings. So this might be the time to have them if you think that it would be helpful for the discussion.
Through the chair, I would urge that we go board comment and public comment on the motion without the video.
Is there a second? Felice, do we need a? Are there any board comments on the current options?